Good morning. It's Monday, January 16th, and it's Martin Luther King weekend. And I read an interesting article in the New York Times yesterday. The article was about a grandmother who was worried about her granddaughter, who was 9 years old and seems to be a fairly intelligent young lady and seems to be an independent young lady. And the grandmother is concerned because she has to walk about a quarter of a mile. That's in the grandmother's thinking. It might be shorter from the bus that drops her off after school. And she's worried about the constant traffic of gardeners and painters and delivery in the neighborhood who could harm her. But her father, who works at home, believes the walk is good for her confidence, and he doesn't think it's worth the risk. And he has refused her offer to pay for someone to meet the bus, walk her home, and get her started on her homework. And her daughter defers to her husband. And this situation keeps me up at night, said the grandmother. Now, in my mind, the grandmother is kind of very worried. Maybe she's a very cautious person. I don't know where she grew up. But when I grew up, we walked to school all over the place. I never took a school bus in my whole life. We came to Smithtown. There was a point at which the bus didn't run through my neighborhood, and my kids walked to school, and they were perfectly happy to school. And then there were many times when my kids chose to walk home from school, even though they could ride the bus. But they weren't alone. They were walking with their buddies. And they walked and cut through areas that weren't even streets to get home. And they had a good time. So is this grandmother a worrier? Because everything you read about children and everything say that 9-year-olds are pretty much on their way to be confident young people and don't need to be treated differently. So I understand the grandmother's concern, but I think it is a certain point at which you should keep your nose out of the kids' business. Now, if they ask for your advice, that's something totally different. Now, I know most of us out there have grandchildren, and I am wondering if any of us would even think about interfering with the way that the child is being handled by his or her parents. I never had a problem with the way that my kids were handling my grandchildren. They all turned out pretty well. I'm not taking any credit for that. And I give my kids credit for having done a good job with my grandchildren. And my son, who has grandchildren of his own, and I have great-grandchildren, and they seem to be doing okay too. So I think this grandmother is like a little bit of a worrier, and maybe she's alone. It doesn't say whether she's still married, whether her husband is still alive, whether she's divorced or anything like that. But obviously the woman has time on her hands, and that's a terrible thing. When you're probably sitting alone at home thinking about things, and the grandmother is probably concerned, really, really concerned, without any real cause to be concerned. And anyhow, she goes and she asks for advice from this column, and the advisor says to her, look, there's no magic age when a child can walk safely home from school or the bus stop. That depends on the maturity of the child and the safety of the neighborhood. So looking at this thing, 9 years old, and the parents think she's confident and everything and intelligent, so they're letting her walk. And the strange thing about this thing, it seems, and I never thought about it, and I don't know if you've ever thought about, what is the age at which a child should start walking home from school? When I was in the city as a young boy, I should say, I believe I was walking home in the first grade. But that was only like a block and a half, because I lived right down the street on Walton Avenue from PS 33. Now, walking the street in New York City or the Bronx or something is much different than walking the streets in the suburb, I'll give you that. But to worry about the laborers and people like that, it's, those cases are extremely rare. So the person who was answering her in the article is, let's talk about your granddaughter's readiness instead. Does she know the route? Will she keep her eyes on the road and off her phone? See? They made a point of saying, will she keep her eyes off her phone? Now that's the bane of existence these days, because every kid has one of those phones. And if you see them, they're walking and talking on that phone and looking at things. So it's quite possible that you get distracted from your phone. So maybe the grandmother's approach would be, I would feel much better if she didn't carry her phone to school. And I'm assuming she has a phone because the phone was mentioned in the article. But the grandmother is at odds with her son-in-law, doesn't really believe the walk is safe, doesn't really believe that the kid is possibly up to the task. But the advisor who wrote the answer in this column said, I doubt your daughter would defer to her husband if she disagreed. They probably know their child better than you do. Well, that's a terrible thing to say to a grandparent. We know our child better than you do. That could set off fireworks all by itself. Grandparents are strange people, when it comes to their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. I don't think you can say anything to a grandparent about the way you're handling a child and their view of the way you're handling a child and get away with it, So most psychologists agree with the son-in-law, however, and so the grandmother did not get any help from this column. And the psychologist actually said, you have to boost your child's confidence. And a walk home from school is one of the ways to do that. So the grandmother was asked politely to stop pressing her case. Because you really don't get a vote, they said in the article. You really don't get a vote. Now maybe that bothers her. Maybe she thinks I'm the mother-in-law and I am entitled to a vote or whatever. And maybe one day you should watch your granddaughter from a distance. Sneak around the corner and peek and see how she's doing on the walk home. See how she navigates the challenge. And I believe if you do something like that, it will set your mind at ease. That's what the advisor said in this article. Now I ask you out there, do you feel the same way? How many of you have worried about your grandchild walking home or riding the bus home from school? Now many of us don't have that problem living in suburbia. The bus stops like on your corner and 12 young people get off the bus together, and they're waving and happy that the school day is over, and they're rushing home to play or do whatever they do after school. But you can see out there are many people who worry about things that are really not their business. And even if they are, it is their business. They really should know their place. So in any event, I leave you with that this morning. A little story from the newspapers. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.